Hello everyone, Skorge here, and we are outside Not Prague, ready to take over. But before we begin taking over, a little channel update. My microphone arrived today, and I've learned some very nice audio editing skills from my YouTube work. As you know, giving you the best quality possible is the goal here, and as such, a little money and effort is well worth it. So without further blabbering on, let us begin. More water! More water! The cry came up from every quarter of the burning city. But there was no more water. The wells had run dry. The baths and fountains were buried, as buildings collapsed in great heaps of ash, and sparks and flames ran from roof to gable, and a pall of smoke obscured the stars. Those too young, too old, or too badly wounded to take their place defending the walls desperately turned to their neighbor for some sign of hope, but all hope had gone with the last of the water. A strong wind carried the flames across the ramparts, fanning the fires and turning Prague into a furnace. Riding into the same wind came the mocking cries of the besieging Chaos Army, the bestial laughter of Chaos Beastmen, the shrill giggling of demons, and the coarse bellow of some unimaginable monstrosity unrestrained and heinous in its hour of triumph. From the tall lookout tower on the north wall, Ivan Tykov, captain of the North Gate, watched his city burn. "The Silversmith Street is almost gone now," he said, not lifting his gray eyes from the blaze now. "I'm sorry, Ivan," said Vladimir, who shared the night watch. He placed his heavy gloved hand reassuringly on Ivan's shoulder. They had been friends since before the war, and Ivan was the silversmith's youngest son, and Vladimir one of 4 apprentices. The war against Chaos had changed everything. Ivan's brothers were dead now. Ivan's father had been crippled 3 years ago whilst fighting in the hills. He had no apprentices these days. "What's the use, Vladimir?" Ivan said weakly. He stared over the burning city, his face expressionless and empty. "They have beaten us, and they know it." He watched helplessly as the line of flames leapt to the Chandler Street and danced down Popper's Lane. "Courage, my friend," Vladimir exhorted gently. "Only this morning a rider came from the Empire. They broke their lines. The word is, there's an army on its way to relieve us. They'll be here tomorrow, or the day after." "Tomorrow," whispered Ivan. "I've heard the rumors too. It's on everyone's lips. They say that Magnus the Vius himself is coming. He is leading an imperial army to save us from chaos. It gives the people something to believe in. I can't believe anymore, Vladimir. It's all gone. Every drop of belief has been squeezed out of me." Vladimir said nothing. He had seen hope die inside of men before, and he knew that this was another sort of death, that a man can no more live without hope than he can live without a heart. He thought of people he had known when the war started, Ivan's brothers amongst them, all gone now. He thought of Ivan's father, crippled and bitter, and his sister, Sazia, lying, screaming in the madhouse. Chaos destroyed them before it finally killed them. Suddenly, a fireball exploded above the lookout tower, and tiny drops of magical flame spattered onto the slate roof. Vladimir ducked down as the hot, burning speckles cascaded down the sides of the slim tower. When he arose, he saw that Ivan had not moved, and that a drop of fire had struck him on the cheek and left a long, dark gash. Another fireball burst to their left, and then, with a mighty thundercrack and a sulphurous flash, the great north gate of Prague exploded into tiny fragments. "The gate!" cried Vladimir, as he seized the alarm bell and began to toll it with all his strength. Reinforcements hurried from their stations along the wall. The fireballs were falling quickly on the ground behind the ramparts. Already, Vladimir could see the casualties below. One man ran hither and thither like a living creature of fire while others chased after him. beating at the flames with their cloaks. A mighty cry came up from the ranks of the enemy. As the forces of chaos surged forward into the gateway, Vladimir gave up the bell and started as fast as he could for the ladder. "They are coming," he said, but Ivan was no longer there. Where the north gate of Prague had stood, there was now only a ragged hull wreathed in a smoke and swirling darkness. Part of the rampart had fallen into the gateway, partially blocking it and crushing several defenders. Their mangled arms and legs protruded from the rubble. Numbed by the blast and shocked by the sudden death of their comrades, the survivors moved like automatons, piling loose stones and timbers on top of the fallen masonry to close the gateway as best they could. But it was too late. From the shadows, a single beastman left. It was faster than its fellows thanks to the mutated and powerfully muscled legs, enabling it to spring over the rough barrier of fallen masonry. Whilst those behind struggled to cross, it lifted its huge goat head and let out a defiant bellow. In its powerful claw-like hands, it held a heavy scimitar which it swung in a glittering arc, felling 2 soldiers before they even had the chance to move. Its second bellow was cut short, and the beastman suddenly folded in 2. The deformed body slumped to the ground, a black-fletched arrow sticking in its neck. Heartened, the defenders swiftly formed a shield wall and leveled their spears to meet the inevitable onslaught. The rest of the beastmen came all at once, scrambling over the rubble and dust, picking their way clumsily across the debris. For once, the might of chaos worked in the defenders' favor, for the destruction of the gate had brought down sufficient wreckage to seriously hamper the creature's attacks. Reduced to a snail pace by this barrier, their impetus was slowed and the full force of their attack was blunted. Those of the defenders who carried bows hurried to take up positions either side of the breach and began to pick off beastmen as they poured over the mound. Soon the corpses were piled several deep, and those few attackers lucky enough to escape the arrows were quickly slain by the spearmen. A black-fletched arrow found its mark, and a beastman toppled down the heap of dead. It was an especially large bull-headed brute, with a third horn which stuck straight out of its forehead. Each spearman braced himself for the next onslaught. Every bowman drew a fresh arrow and sought a target, but no horned heads bobbed above the pile of corpses. For a moment, all fell silent, and the defenders loosened the grip they had on their weapons. Then it came, a gathering darkness like a thick, oily smoke. It oozed through the gate and settled about their feet. Dark tendrils of the stuff thrashed this way and that, and where they touched against a solid surface, they appeared to adhere to it. As if grasped by some titanic forces, the mound of debris and corpses was slowly pushed aside. Tiny streaks of magical energy twisted across the gateway. The defenders drew their weapons again, but there was not a man amongst them who did so without a stricken heart. Very slowly, as if heedless of danger, a dark horseman rode in through the gateway and halted. The air was still and thick with dark magic, and this darkness seemed to congeal around the rider, as if he were absorbing it, pulling it back into himself, if such a thing were possible. His armor was a black, burnished iron, and in his right hand he carried a mighty war sword. Barbed and bright, it seemed to quiver with a malevolent life of its own. The rider craned his head slowly, back and forth. His gaze fell upon the defenders. They could see that his eyes were red and glowed like coals inside the black helmet, which bore the unspeakable rune marking its wearer as a champion of Tzeentch. The champion of chaos began to laugh in a slow and measured fashion. The sword flew from the champion's grasp, and the heads of 4 of the soldiers were severed in an instant. Their bodies dropped to the ground, spurting crimson blood. The dark horseman laughed louder, and his sword flew again, running through one man, impaling another who stood behind him. Some men tried to parry the sword with their weapons, or attempted to fend off it with their shields. Their arms were as soft as limbs of infants compared to the unearthly strength of that chaos blade. One bowman shot an arrow against the rider, only to watch his shaft turn effortlessly aside by the black armor. The hapless archer dropped his bow and ran, but he was too late to escape the black blade that cut him in two. The rest of the defenders fled. The sword flew gently back into the dark horseman's grasp. Its strange sheen seemed to vanish, and its inner life appeared to dim. The champion sheathed the chaos sword, raised his head, and looked slowly about him. There stood alone, barring his path in the Prague, was one man, a tall, pale man in the uniform of a captain of the gate. One cheek was gashed and dripped with blood. The horseman gazed at him for a moment before he spoke. "Are you not afraid, Captain?" he said. His voice was light and soft, innocent and strangely compelling. It was an altogether unexpected voice, coming as it did from the massive black-armored champion of Siege. "Not anymore," replied Ivan. He was surprised to hear how coarse and vulgar his own voice sounded, compared to that of the dark horseman. "Are you not afraid of death?" asked the champion now, with a note of genuine curiosity. "Death," said Ivan. "Me afraid? I wear the pall of death for a winter cloak to warm me. The world, too, is under its shadow, and becomes quite hot." Ivan gestured wildly as if to encompass the burning city. He raised his sword, and it seemed a great weight in his hand. "Then you are mad!" exclaimed the champion, and he seemed pleased to have solved the puzzle. "Mad?" said Ivan, in the same dispassionate voice. "Not unless it is madness to prefer death to abomination." He lunged forward and made to strike the Chaos Champion, but the Dark Horseman's horse reared away so that Ivan's blade cut empty air. Flames snorted from the horse's nostrils, and its eyes too appeared to glow with hidden fury. The Chaos Champion laughed. "Fight!" screamed Ivan. "Fight, you coward!" He swung his sword again and again, but as each blow fell, the Dark Horseman skillfully avoided it, pulling his black charger out of the blade's path. The Chaos Champion laughed again. Ivan sank to his knees, quaking with fury. The rider drew a long, pale knife, ignoring the Chaos sword that had already killed so many, and which, if truth be known, was now too sated with blood to be tempted from its scabbard. As he did so, another voice rang out, the harsh but refreshingly human voice of Vladimir. "Run, Ivan! Run!" cried Vladimir, as he stepped from the shadows, swinging his steel sword in a gleaming arc. He threw himself upon the horseman. This time, the dark warrior did not step back, for he had been so intent upon Ivan. He had not seen Vladimir creeping up in the darkness. Vladimir's blade bounced from burnished iron armor with a stretched, piercing screech as if he had struck a living thing rather than an inanimate metal. The black horse span around as its rider called it tightly to rein, kicking out with its great iron-shod hooves and striking Vladimir upon the temple. The watchman's sword slid from his grasp, and he fell senseless to the ground. Ivan had been no less surprised by the attack than the Chaos Champion. Now he gripped his sword and leapt to his feet, calling his friend's name as he did so. "Vladimir!" he cried. The tears were running down his cheeks. Vladimir lay still, and dark blood was seeping from his head. Ivan bounded between his friend's body and the Chaos Champion. The rider still had his long knife in his hand, and he pointed its blade directly at Ivan. Ivan raised his sword and prepared to fight. "Curse you, you Chaos Fiend!" he shouted. The champion spurred his horse, then he checked it, suddenly, and pulled the unearthly creature back. "Farewell, Captain," he said, and threw the knife with unnerving accuracy. With a heavy thump, the blade embedded itself in a piece of broken gate. The champion of chaos laughed soft and turned his horse through the black gate. "Perhaps we shall meet again," he cried as he disappeared into the swirling darkness. Well, that's that. I really like that one because it actually kind of gives you a representation of the things within that book, like for example the Beastman followers of that Chaos Champion, but it also shows us the realistic look at the Chaos Sword and how it was quenched and all that. I really like that one. If you want to pick this one up, it actually is on Scribd if you just upload some documents. There's plenty of guides on it. Just, you got this. I don't care. If you enjoyed that, well, consider leaving a like or a comment or really whatever. I don't care. I'm a 13 subscriber channel, like, you know. But if you do want to subscribe, well, cool. Thanks. Glad you're here.